In de lente van 2017 ging ik in op het verzoek van Sulaiman Addonia om aan zijn zijde creatief schrijven te doseren in de Sans Souci bibliotheek in Elsene. En dit aan deelnemers met een achtergrond als vluchteling of asielzoeker. Hij was tot dit initiatief gekomen door de behoefte die hij zelf aan zo'n workshop had gevoeld. Hij kent het belang van mensen voor zichzelf te laten spreken, de noodzaak je eigen verhaal in handen te houden. Die inzichten en behoeften werden gedeeld door onze studenten, met wie we enkele blije, ontroerende, rommelige en werklustige weken deelden, waarbij veel verhalen naar de oppervlakte rezen. Ik had Sulaiman en zijn vrouw Lies een jaar eerder voor het eerst ontmoet en ik had zijn The Consequences of Love, of Als gevolg van liefde, gelezen. Een veelvuldig vertaald boek waaraan ik nu terugdenk alsof het een film is die ik heb gezien. Door dat boek had ik begrepen dat Sulaiman zelf in Saoedi-Arabië had gewoond en door gesprekken en interviews met hem kon ik de Odyssee of hellegang, waar die Saoedische periode deel van uitmaakte, reconstrueren. Eritrea, Sudan, Saoedi-Arabië, Groot-Brittannië, België. Welke impact zijn steeds verhuizende, steeds afscheidnemende leven op zijn taal had, drong pas tot me door toen ik Sulaiman bij een pauze tijdens onze cursus achteloos vroeg wat dan eigenlijk zijn moedertaal was. Hij vertelde dat hij die niet had, niet meer althans. Die talige thuisloosheid van de schrijver trof me en dat deed ook de titel van de tweede roman die hij toen aan het schrijven was en die in de Nederlandse vertaling van Irwan Droog, verschenen bij uitgeverij Jurgen Maas, gelukkig behouden werd. Stilte is mijn moedertaal, het boek dat we vanavond vieren. De titel is een antwoord op mijn vraag van destijds. De stilte is er een waarin demonen wonen. Sulaiman Addonia teert op eigen ervaringen wanneer hij ons meevoert naar een Soedanees vluchtelingenkamp, waar hij ons laat kennismaken met vele personages. Hoofdpersonage Saba en haar broer Hagos, die hoe langer hoe meer uit één lichaam lijken te bestaan. Maar de werkelijkheid is bij de schrijver bouwmateriaal geworden. Zijn taal en stijl zijn poëtischer en meer eigen dan in zijn vorige roman. Die eerste roman verdient lof om de schijnbaar moeiteloze, evenwichtige structuur van het verhaal, maar wat me misschien nog het meest boeide in Stilte is mijn moedertaal, wat ik in het bijzonder apprecieerde, is dat de schrijver zichzelf hier heel bewust van een al te strak keurslijf ontdoet en kiest voor een meer fragmentarische, associatieve opbouw, die een wat bedwelmend effect op de lezer sorteert. Wanneer we als auteurs het leven zelf willen aanraken, moeten we ons volgens mij aan de fragmentatie durven over te leveren. En hoe traumatischer de gebeurtenissen waarop geteerd wordt, hoe meer dat waarschijnlijk het geval is. Zowel op het gebied van taal, stijl, toon als structuur lijkt Sulaiman Addonia de veilige paden te hebben verlaten en een eigen stem te hebben gevonden. Dit is verre van een roman die om sympathie, laat staan om medelijden bedelt. Addonia is geen pleaser. Hij stopt de pijn en de lelijkheid niet weg, maar verbindt ze met schoonheid, wat een soms ontregelende uitwerking op de lezer heeft. Zijn personages worden langs alle kanten aan gevaar blootgesteld, maar houden weerbaar stand, niet in het minst door zelf de grenzen van hun geslacht te overschrijden. Door in de dorre omgeving van het kamp als het ware voor een intieme vorm van vloeibaarheid te kiezen. Net als in zijn eerste boek toont de schrijver een grote preoccupatie met het lot van vrouwen. In veel interviews getuigde hij over de vele vormen van geweld tegenover vrouwen en uitsluiting van vrouwen die hij tijdens zijn jeugd aanschouwde, de impact die hun pijn en kracht op hem hadden, de mate van solidariteit waartoe hij werd genoopt. In Stilte is mijn moedertaal kijkt hij door de geest van zijn vrouwelijke hoofdpersonage Saba en lijkt hij schrijvend ook in het lichaam van vrouwen te kruipen, letterlijk soms, zoals wanneer hij schrijft: de binnenkant van een vrouw is gemaakt van zee, dacht Saba, zeewier, vissen, ballonnen, plastic tassen, liefdesbrieven in eindeloos dobberende flessen, verdriet, gelach. Een mooi voorbeeld ook van de poëzie die hij hanteert en het contrast. De eerste keer dat ik Sulaiman ontmoette, zei hij dat een auteur volgens hem in de eerste plaats vrij moet zijn. Na de lange kweeste die achter hem ligt, blijft hij noodgedwongen voor die vrijheid strijden. Het is mooi te zien dat hem de energie en vrijgevigheid resten ook anderen over de opgelegde grenzen heen te helpen. Zoals met het Asmara Addis Festival dat hij organiseert en de literaire prijs die hij in het leven heeft geroepen, waarmee hij wil tonen dat literatuur, dat de verhalen die in België worden verteld, zich niet enkel tot de officiële landstalen beperken. En met het belichten van te weinig gehoorde stemmen helpt hij ook de Belgen zonder migratieachtergrond over grenzen heen. Fascinerend om zijn columns te kunnen lezen over zijn eigen worsteling met het Nederlands, de zoveelste taal, de taal die hij dan toch een kans besloot te geven. Je eigen boek lezen in vertaling kan helpen bij het verwerven van een nieuwe taal, weet ik. Al moet ik toegeven dat ik zelf nooit tot de laatste bladzijde ben geraakt. Hoe dan ook, het kan een extra voordeel zijn van het verschijnen van de Nederlandse vertaling van het boek dat we vanavond vieren en dat hopelijk nog veel nieuwe lezers zal bereiken. Je kunt alleen maar bewondering voelen voor de manier waarop Sulaiman Addonia, net als zijn schrijvende broer Saleh trouwens, literair weet uit te stijgen boven wat hun is overkomen. We zijn ongeveer even oud, Sulaiman en ik, maar onze levenspaden zijn ontzettend verschillend geweest. Toch begrijp ik zijn personages. Hij laat ze mij begrijpen. En ik meen iets te snappen van het universele verlangen van auteurs, iets te schrijven om in te wonen. En dat kan niet zonder transgressie. Het vraagt moed, confrontatie en een grote inspanning een boek als Stilte is mijn moedertaal te schrijven. Sulaiman Addonia heeft dan wel geen moedertaal meer, maar hij heeft zijn literaire taal en stem gevonden.
Dankjewel Annelies voor deze mooie introductie die al heel veel vertelt over het boek waar we het de rest van de avond over willen hebben. Can I now invite Sulaiman and Ubah to join me on stage? Because as the main part of the presentation, Sulaiman not only wanted to speak himself, but asked his friend Ubah, Cristina, Ali Farah, you got there, thank you, to join us for more than one reason. And Sulaiman just told me when we were having a very light dinner before coming here that he didn't want Ubah to be reduced to somebody talking about his book, because Ubah Cristina is an author of her own right, living in Brussels as well, and incorporating some of the diversity and of the luxury that Brussels actually offers in terms of being a global city. Ubah, you wrote 3 novels, and some poems, and some reports, and some academic works. The novels were, if I remember well, Madre Piccolo, something with the captain of the river. How's that? El Capitano del Fiume. And then the third one was Le Stagione della Luna. So 3 books, 3 novels, just because I didn't know them, I admit. So I presume that some people might not know them either. Are those novels, are those stories set in Italy, which is where you were born, to your, and you had an Italian father, no, an Italian mother and a Somali father, right? You spent some time in Mogadishu afterwards. you returned to Italy. So where do you situate your novels? Is that a reflection of your story of life, or is it disconnected to that? Is it more rooted?
Oh, thank you so much for this question. I want to relate what I write with the work that Sulaiman does, because we met in Brussels. I was very lucky because we met when I've just arrived from Brussels. So my story is not like Sulaiman's story, but somehow that there are some similarities, some links with his story as well. Because I was born in Italy. My mother is Italian, and my father went to Italy because Somalia was a previous Italian colony, and he went there to study at university. And then when I was when I was 2, something like that, I went to. He decided, and my mother followed him to go back to Mogadishu. And I was raised there. I grew up there. And when I was 18, I mean, in 1991, the civil war in Somalia started, so I have to leave the country. And then I moved to Hungary, and then I moved to Italy. That was the country of my mom. And then I moved, to different cities in Italy. And then I moved finally to Brussels 9 years ago. And I was lucky enough to meet Sulaiman. And it was just a coincidence because there was isn't it true, Sulaiman? There was a sort of a symposium about writers from the Eastern Africa writing in different languages. So it was me, Sulaiman, Maza Mengistu, who is an Ethiopian writer who writes in English, and another writer that I don't remember the name. Sulaiman is from Eritrea, and he writes in Arabic. Do you remember him? Yeah. And it was the first time that we met. And I thought that was really the first days that I was in here. And I thought that I was very lucky about that, because I think that Brussels has this kind of opening in a way, because Italy is so closed. And when I left Italy, I think that many people feel, as my father, I mean, he after the war, he went to Holland, and he was exiled in Holland for many years. And Holland was very, I mean, somehow he was refused by Italy, and in a way, I felt this kind of how can I say, this kind of an environment where people could talk in different languages and have different stories, very welcoming. And so this is the beginning of our friendship. And it was a very difficult period for both of us, because there was this thing of the exile, and at the same time of the language that for Sulaiman less than for me, because I didn't talk. For me, English is not. Sulaiman writes in English, and English is not one of the main languages here in Brussels. But you can be understood here. For me, was Italian and Somali, and I didn't speak French at the time, and then I learned French. Unfortunately, I didn't learn English, Dutch. But so
one day you will.
I will. Yes, I have. I must. Yeah, I must.
So, just briefly, because my question was, where is the story that you tell in the 3 books? Where do they take place? Is it Brussels? Is it Somalia? Is it Italy?
So the first 2 novels are about the diaspora. This is why I was starting from the very beginning, because one of the first questions that I was asking myself after the Civil War, I was 18 when the Civil War started, and one of the main questions that I was asking myself, I always tell this story that I was raised in Somalia, in Mogadishu, and at the beginning I was attending a Somali school in Somali, And then I went to an Italian school, and I used to write every day a sort of a journal. And then after the war, I was unable to talk and to write, and something is related to your novel, to Sulaiman's novel as well, because when something very awful happens, it's very difficult to find the words to tell the story that's happened to you, because you don't want to scare people, basically. You don't want to, I don't know, you don't have the vocabulary, the words to tell that story. And I always tell this story because for 6 years I was unable to write at all, and I was somebody who would write every day, constantly. And I think that also was somehow my training also to writing, because writing is also something that we have to do every day. It's not true that everyone can write. You need also to be trained to write. And what happened was that one day, at the time was not so easy to travel, I went to visit my father, who was living in Zeist, near Utrecht at the time. And I had been saving this money for a long time, because we didn't have Ryanair at the time, and I arrived there, and all these people from the diaspora were waiting for me, and they came to the airport. And the story that I tell always is that I'm short-sighted, and so I don't see at the distance, and I have my how do you say that, Sulaiman? My lentils, my lens, and I dropped one of my lens on the floor, and I didn't have time, so I just went to Holland with with one lens, only one lens, and I think that this is just a metaphor to see, because I didn't know what to do. That you see, you know that when you are short-sighted, when you see things very close, they are very clear. But when they are at the distance, they are very blurred. You don't see anything. And so this is kind of this feeling of being very inside the world and being outside at the same time is this is why I started writing again. This vision and hearing all these stories, and I thought also that it was very important to tell these stories, because sometimes I think, Sulaiman, maybe you will agree with me, for a writer it's very difficult to say who I am to tell these stories, yeah, and then something happens and you feel this responsibility, you know, somehow, yeah.
Okay, Ubah, thank you very much for you
Yes.
immediately helped us to know who's on the stage with us, and from where you're writing, and I think the detail about being muted by the experience is a very crucial one, and we will return to that later this evening. Sulaiman, you invited Ubah also to this presentation, because Ubah was one of the people that read Silence before it was finished. She accompanied, in a sense, the story into the book that it became. Why would an author ask somebody to read parts of the book, parts of the characters, before they're finished? They're so vulnerable at that early stage. So why do you ask somebody, and how do you decide who gets to read the material?
First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and people, to Steven and Jurgen and everyone who organized, double Jurgen, and Gie and Ubah, and also Annelies, Verbeke, thank you so much. I'm gonna, I just started level 2-1 in Dutch, so I'm gonna take your text and translate every single word. But I always say that Annelies is really one of the best readers I have ever seen. Like, she's absolutely marvelous. And we were talking about her because we had her at the first edition of the Asmara Addis Literature Festival, and everyone was like, "Who is she?" you know, all my English British writer friends, and also Annelies and I, when I came up with this idea to create the Creative Writing Academy for Refugees, the first one I approached was Annelies, and she and I basically sat down and thrashed the how we're gonna do the course, because I had no idea. I just had an idea to set up a creative writing academy, but I didn't know what to teach or how to teach it. So we went to a cafe here, just in the center, and we sat down, and because she had more experience than me in teaching, and we just sat down and we brainstormed, and we taught the first masterclass together, and then the second masterclass with Sophie, who's also here, a friend of mine, a writer, also a poet, and then the third masterclass with Ubah. So anyway, this long introduction to say thank you, but I have to say my first reader actually is Liz Kreines, who's here. She's the one. I actually don't like having many readers, and because and I never ever actually give my work to anyone else but Liz, and then because I don't like having like too many opinions, because I also think like the tighter you keep it, the closer you are to your vision, you know. And so I'm very guarded in who I let into my stories. I think it was half of the book that Ubah read, and the reason was I never doubted this book, but it was taking such a long time. It took me 10 years to finish the book, and I got to a stage, I guess, where I felt, right, you know, when Liz was saying that, you know, her honest opinion, which I felt like was a bit different to mine, then I thought like, because Ubah and I, we used to meet a lot, have coffee, and you know, and so like I could see like certain times like she has kind of quite, you know, like certain themes we tend to kind of migrate like on the path quite similarly. So I felt like, okay, do you want to read half of the book? And then I gave it to her, and I didn't have title at the time. And I know she was trying to suggest titles, I was just ignoring her. But because I
was going to ask Sulaiman, in referring to Ubah, but certainly also referring to Liz. Liz is the partner of Sulaiman. Does it require love or friendship to let somebody read it? And on the other hand, can it survive? Can friendship and love survive reading a story and giving feedback?
I think it's another evening. Yeah, that's another evening. I never thought you'd go there. I wish you had said that. There are things you ask and things you shouldn't ask. You know, they always ask me before the interview, would you like, and I hate telling people what to ask or not to ask, so this would be you know, a lesson. That's definitely something I should think about. Too late. I think this is a very, very important question you asked, actually, and I'm really glad you asked it. I never got asked that question. I think it alters the relationship, and I think that's the beauty about literature, is that it alters your perception about so many things. I don't think a book is capable of changing someone's life. I mean, I totally agree with the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, who said towards the end of his life, I thought my poetry would change the world, but now I only know he said, now I know the only person that my poetry changes me, no one else. And I think, but I think literature has, I think it kind of it plays on the details, the small details, and those are the kind of thing that I love about literature. And definitely, like when you have readers, someone like Liz, someone close to you, for example, or the relationship is not the same after the reading happens, because I guess like there are things in the book that are quite bold, and then obviously there are things that a lot of if the closer people towards you, they will have questions about those kind of the source of those ideas, the material and stuff like that. But but I think what I look in a reader is a very critical feedback. That's why, and also literary critical feedback. Someone who knows, I don't think Liz liked a lot of the things in the book, and she told me, and I'm really, I kept them because my vision, but but that's the beauty, is that you sometimes give it, like I said, friends of mine, they give it to 5, 6, I'm one of the few actually, and that's not me patting myself on the back, but like my last novel, my third novel, I finished it last year, and I have shown it to no one. I finished it and I sent it to my agent, and directly, even Liz, she hasn't seen it. So I think silence, probably, maybe that was in my head, like, there things happen after silence, and I felt maybe the best thing I could do now is just to do it alone. Yeah.
Ubah, you did get half of the book, you read it. Were you also saying, Sulaiman, I don't like these persons, I don't like the story? Or were you saying, I love this so much? And was it maybe after after Liz's criticism, he needed somebody to say it's great anyway?
I don't know, because for me, I mean, when I ask people to read things, it's more because I don't know, because Sulaiman, maybe you can say that it's not true, but I think that for me it was more what I would love him to talk about more. I think things that were not clear to me, or things that I would have loved to know more about, these kind of things. And I don't know, because it's very difficult. I think that it's very difficult to find the ideal editor for you, because it's not even a professional. Because for the last novel, I wrote the last novel in a very short time, and I had this very dear friend of mine that I was in lockdown in South Africa, and Sulaiman knows that, and I was talking to her every day, and it was so crazy, because it was something that this novel I had been thinking about this novel for years, researching, because it is an historical novel, and every day it was so funny, because we were talking about this novel, and I had two people that were reading this. No, one of them was not reading, but he was helping me with historical, details, and because he lived in those years, and but she was reading that, and of course, when somebody reads your work every day, and she's a friend of mine, her name is Laura, and she lives in Melbourne, so we are very far away from each other. This is why we cannot fight, because she's so...
When you don't like her feedback, you just put
I can just put the phone down. Yeah, but maybe it worked because of that. Yeah. So.
But it helped you to
yes, a lot. And she was very critical sometimes. She was like, and sometimes also I took some directions because of her as well, because she loved some things, and so sometimes it works, but not always. And I think, Sulaiman, if I can say that, because Liz is here, that when people are too close, it may be more difficult. Yeah, because they know your story and they have a relationship with you, and yeah.
How did you digest the feedback, Sulaiman? We're talking now about 2 readers. I don't know if there were maybe more, 3 or whatever. They give you feedback in the course of the story that you've been struggling with to put on paper. You said it took you 10 years. You told me that you took long nightly walks around Excel to get the characters to develop themselves. So it was not an easy book to write. Then you have outsiders coming in with their questions or maybe suggestions, ideas. Why don't you do? How do you digest that?
You're talking about
the process of writing.
I know, but also you're talking about 2 readers who read my work. But let's not forget, like, the books you read are also your readers in a way, because, like for example, I think I only, to be honest, even with the first novel, my only reader was Liz. But I always think I have other readers, and those are usually books that I read, and they tend to be dead poets or dead writers. And why I say that, because if, for example, Lee says something, and then she said to me, oh, this is like, for example, a bit too bold, or not too bold, but it's too much, or this and that, then I would read a book, for example, by George Bataille, or someone like that, and then I would see how bold they are and how visionary they are, and then I would consider their opinion against, for example, someone who's a bit like different, and then and that's why it's important, because I know writers, we talk about the readers who actually read our work, but it's really equally important to talk about the books that you read while you're writing, But for me, in terms of, like Ubah said, it's, sometimes you feel offended. Like it's, sometimes you feel upset, or sometimes you feel there's a reaction in the moment, and then there's another reaction that happens a day or so after. And I think the most important one is the thing that happened a day or so after, after you digest it, you see, and then and that's why I learned now. I have the experience now as a writer. It's like, if my editor, for example, she would say to me, this, I would never tell her like, oh, this is shit, I'll just be like, okay, those are the things I agree, and those are the things that I don't agree with. So, you learn as you write more and more.
Ubah, the novel Silence is My Mother Tongue, as Annelies said, is not a novel that is written to please the reader. It's a challenging, intense novel that's challenging in the sense that it challenges your prejudice or your ideas about how people are or what the reality is in a refugee camp setting, for instance, or more broadly speaking, probably for some people, it challenges their idea of Africa. But let's not move into the Africa thing, but stay closer to the setting of the novel. Did you feel that the characters and the interactions, the development, if you can call it like that, there's some development in the novel, did you feel that that was credible? And is that important? Or how did you read the story as it finally shaped up?
Thank you so much for this question, because Sulaiman and I, one of the main issues we were talking about from the very beginning was about intimacy, right, Sulaiman? So we're talking about intimacy because he was telling me, when you live in a refugee camp, you don't have intimacy. And this is why one of the most powerful metaphors...
Would you say you don't have intimacy, or you don't have privacy?
Yes, you don't have privacy. Intimità. I was just translating from Italian, sorry. yeah, you don't have privacy. Sorry. And yes, you don't have privacy, and so this is also this metaphor of the cinema, which I found very powerful, especially because he refers also to the Italian cinema.
Silenzioso.
Yes, and this idea of the illusion and what is real and what it is not, and yes, the privacy, that everything is shared, even the very, private things are shared. Everyone can see them, and so I think that it was very courageous from Sulaiman, very brave from him to do this, because when just to this idea of talking about people, about desire, about things that don't have to do with suffering. Like, of course, there is the suffering. There are many things that are going on, but at the same time, not focusing on them, focusing on especially. I think that in Sulaiman's novel, the body is very powerful. The presence of the body is there. The body is always there. What the body does, and because I think also because of this thing of living together and living close to each other, and all these sensual and yes, things are very, yeah. I don't know if it makes sense what I say.
As far as I know, yes, it does. Sulaiman, as Ubah says, the body is a very central character, embodied in different people that then transgress into each other. But as a whole, the body might be a central character in the novel. We don't often think of sexual desire or of intimacy when we think about refugee camps. We think about the anxiety, the anger, the fear, the suffering, not about the people having bodily desires or physical desires, or transgressing even the bodily into sexuality as spirituality. You bring all that in this novel, and it's, why is it so, not strange, but why don't we get that kind of approach more often? How did you decide, let me put it another way, how did you decide that this would be a central theme of your novel set in the Sudanese refugee camp where you grew up as a kid?
Well, I think the body is central because of where the inspiration came from. Like, so in 2009, I went to Paris with Lise, and we visited the museum and then came out with Degas' book. And you know, I'm so much interested in paintings. And so I was sitting in a cafe having a coffee, and then I was going through the book, and then I saw one of Degas' painting, a woman taking a bath. And she was taking a bath in a bucket, which is how I used to take a bath when I was in a camp. And so there was that memory, and then the body. And then I thought to myself, you know, I could actually paint a woman character in my book in words, like just like Degas did with brush, you know. So I was like, okay, I had this kind of idea, that's where the idea came. And so that's why the body becomes central. And then once you have an idea like that, once you have a process, and then the interesting thing to me was you come in confrontation with the Western perceptions of other parts of the world. So I presented my book I was working with an agent at the time, someone, and not only the agent but the other people as well in the publishing industry in the UK, while I was writing it from here. And then the feedback I was getting was, a Western reader wouldn't understand this because it's about, there's too much this, how does it come into account? There's all these questions, and I felt like, this is the worst thing you could do to a writer is put a reader in front of their eyes, because I ultimately, it's all, like Jonathan Freeman, for example, he closes his eyes when he writes, and we all have our own ways of actually not only isolating ourselves, but actually departing from this world to a parallel universe in order to create. That's why writing is so difficult. And I think so. For me, it was just like too much of a Western reader. I just didn't want to get engaged. I said to myself, right, I made the hard decision at the time that actually the people I was working with, they had a perception as Western of other parts of the world, and that was one of the big hindrances actually happens to a lot of creatives from my part of the world if they want to publish in the Western world, is that there are so many people sitting with their own ideas and assumptions. And for me, I've decided, right, I'm just gonna isolate. I fired everyone. I came, I said to myself, I'm gonna do this on my own, and that's what I did.
I see the point about the Western prejudice or expectations or how they are perceived. But wouldn't that be exactly the same if you would be writing somewhere in Africa with an African publisher, an African redactor? Wouldn't they say, Sulaiman, I wouldn't do this. African readers will not appreciate the way that you treat gender, sexuality, transgression, fluidity. I imagine that there would be a problem too, no?
It might. That's a hypothetical. I don't know.
Okay.
I can only talk about things that happened to me when I was writing the book. It might and it might not. I mean, actually, it's a failure of this institution to imagine a Western reader being as one. I am Western as well, and also you are basically, what you're trying to say is that you have one definition of a reader, while we know, for example, readers have all, in this room, for example, some people would like, different things. I mean, we are different, and so our own background, wherever we come from, even, you're from Ghent, from the same family in Ghent, you will have different literary tastes. That's the...
But my question refers to what is in your novel as well, because what is between your characters
right.
and their desire is very often tradition.
Right.
And the guardians, self-appointed
right.
guardians often of tradition. So how do you deal with that tension between desire and tradition, between individuality and collectivity? How do you balance that in your novel or in your life?
In my novel. Yeah, I mean, yeah. But in my novel, I don't know if, I know there are a few writers here, I don't know if they agree with me, and I know I've said this many times before, but I say it briefly, and I think I mentioned it to you before. It's like, honestly, for me, I don't feel myself when I write, and that's the most beautiful, part about writing for me, is that I surrender myself to the story, and so because I want to create from my subconscious, not from my conscious. Like I told you before, like the conscious is where the judgment is, where you, as a person, as an individual, you have your own upbringing with all the prejudices, like the traditions, the religion, and so on. And so as a writer, when you come to create, if you write from that process, from that side of that conscious side, then you can't write characters, some of the characters I work with, because immediately, and that's what was happening to me at the time, immediately you come into contact with that force of tradition that you carry inside you, you know? So there's that tension. And I think for me, the idea of liberation, for me as a writer, was to say, fine, you know? To realize actually I have two parts of my imagination when I write, and one is conscious, one subconscious. And how to give power to the subconscious, that has been like big job for me as a writer. You know, writing a sentence, you know, many of us can do, but I think the greatest thing we need to teach aspiring writers is actually where to find, or where to find the separation between the conscious and subconscious, and how to empower the subconscious. Because once you do that, I really don't care. You don't know. I have no idea. Somebody was reading, you know, from my book, and I was like, did I write that? It's just, you know, like, I have no idea when I create. And I think ultimately that's the thing. I can write a woman, I can write Jewish, I can write Christian, I can write any person, because the act of writing is an act of transcendence.
Is the fact that you use silence as a language a way to overcome the conscious? Because we think, we analyze in language, and when you step back from language, maybe it's easier to create a space where another kind of reality finds space to express itself. Is, in the sense, the silence in, not just in the title, but in the novel, it's not a handicap, it's an entrance to a reality that we often don't see. Would that sound right to you?
I like the interpretation, but I don't know if it's one of the reasons why. I think I like the fact that you say the entrance. I think for me it was also a form of invitation, actually, to see that a language is not just spoken, or to see gender is not just one thing, or to see the idea of sex is not just one thing, or to see the idea of love is not just one thing, you know. And that's what I've been interested in, and how do you actually give credence to all the multiplicity within us that we carry as human beings. And one of the languages actually that we speak, when people speak, they say, oh, I speak Dutch, French, no one says I speak silence, you know. But if you really think about it, if you really pay attention, it's one of the languages that actually all of us carry, and it's a universal language as well. But I wanted to ask Ubah, and I know with, like, you know, we met together we met together, you know, we've known each other before, but we used to meet a lot at a cafe, and because I just wanted to know how cafe culture, when you write, I know you also write at home, are the two different, like when you write at a cafe and when you write at home?
Good question. Yeah. So maybe I think that somehow this question is somehow related also with the idea of silence, because sometimes I was thinking about trauma, because I thought about trauma and how also unspoken things are transmitted, especially to children, to our children. Because do you remember that we were talking about this, that I had my first child when I was very young. He was born during the war in Somalia, and then he grew up in Italy most of the time. But while he was growing up, I was thinking, did he know something about an experience that he didn't live? So this is also silence, no? Because you don't tell him, perhaps not because you don't want to tell things, but through your body, to your emotions, through what you do, you can transmit these kind of things. And then I go back to this kind of to the environments where you write. For me, cafes sometimes are very powerful because you see people, and especially when you write, you are so like how do you say, you just see everything, and sometimes it can be also dangerous because you just absorb everything, and sometimes for me it's too distracting. So I know that you love cafes, but sometimes for me it's too much because it's too many things are happening in my mind when in the cafes. But sometimes I need it, and yeah.
Ubah, I wanted to ask you, connecting to what Sulaiman was saying, you told us in the beginning that it took 6 years before you could start writing again. It's a kind of silence that you were thrown into because of the trauma. When you read Sulaiman's novel about silence as a mother tongue, what did that do? How did that resonate with your own personal experience?
That was very powerful because I was talking about how can I say, about trauma, but also about taboos. I don't know if you say that in English. So things that we cannot say. So at the beginning I was using this word intimacy, but because I was thinking a lot about in my own experience. For example, there is a word in Somali to say civil war, which is dagaalka, which means, if you translate it, the war between intimates, which is something that you cannot talk about because it is like your parents are fighting against each other, and it is something that you don't talk about because it's something so intimate that you are ashamed of. And this is why it was so important, Sulaiman's novel to me, because there were things that I was not even able to think, and then it was just a click. How can I say that? I said, okay, we can say these things. It's not something. And if I can say, yes, I say that. I say that in Somali to say civil war. We said, the war against intimates, and I was working while I was living in Italy. I was working with a group of young Somali refugees that just came to Italy, and they would never say dagaalka while speaking in Somali. They were always using metaphors to say that word because it was too powerful. So I think that this is why at the beginning, instead of privacy, I said intimacy, because it was this thing that for me is very important. Yeah.
Ubah, thank you.
Thank you.
There's too many other things that we could continue to talk about, but maybe there are some questions that we need to answer from you, because maybe some of you already read the novel or listening to Sulaiman and Ubah and Annelies in the beginning. There's things that you would want to know, and I didn't ask them yet. So let's take a few minutes for your questions, if there are any. I know that especially Flemish people are absolutely world known for coming up with questions and intervening. Usually they take 10 minutes and then after the break they come up with the questions. But maybe tonight we're in Brussels. Yeah.
Sulaiman, I don't know if you have children, but if you have children, do you speak about what happened to you, or do you deny that?
I have two.
Everybody hear the question? Okay.
I have two children. I think, like Ubah said, you can't, I mean, all of us, I think, in our lives, things happen to us, you know. And so it's just like, I guess, waiting. We all wait, I think, as parents for the right time before you tell certain things, because you want children to make their own, you don't want to overwhelm them with things. But, you know, you also, at the same time, you notice, like Ubah said, that kids have a certain sensitivity where they pick up things, which is incredible. And I was talking actually to a friend of mine who's a writer, Jewish, and he wrote this amazing essay. It's called it's about trauma, intergenerational trauma, and you know, and also and how like certain things pass on without speaking, because we do think. I do. Silence is also a language, you know. So it's like how you communicate to a child is not necessarily by saying, okay, for me anyway, you sit down a child and you say, this happened to me. I think there are times for that, but also there are times where you feel like ultimately, sometimes you're just silent and they will understand things. And but yeah, I mean, sometimes I like to be honest with my kids, so if they ask me, I never hide. Yeah.
Picking up from what Ubah said, Sulaiman, the conflict that you were taken out of into the refugee camp, not in the novel, but in real life, was basically also a conflict that was deep inside the family. Your father and your mother belonged to different parts of the conflicting nations. One, your mother Eritrean, your father Ethiopian, and it was a war between them, not between the parents. But does that complicate the memory, how you can live with it, and how you express it?
I think for a long time, neither side kind of accepted me, because the Ethiopian side, obviously, they almost didn't want to see me as a child, but some of the Eritrean side were like also something aware, like my father was Ethiopian. And so I always grew up like in this environment where I didn't know, where do I come from, or where do I belong? Because as a child, because my father passed away when I was young, so I grew up with my mom's side. But her family were just, they just made me feel, obviously, it's normal. But I'm talking about the wider society, because when we often think about belonging, we think belonging like, you say, I am Flemish, but then does your neighbor, accept you as Flemish? I don't know, if you're Polish and you say I'm Flemish, because you were born here, does your neighbor accept you? So, belonging is not just about you saying I belong here, because there are also other factors outside. So for me, I've always been an outsider in life, wherever I've been to, and that's why I think I picked up something that Annelies said about, finding a nation or a language in literature, or a mother tongue in literature. And I think I am so blessed and lucky to have found that. Yeah.
Your own language,
yeah.
Your own mother tongue.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah?
It's a question, but it first of all, it will take me some time to formulate it, because I will formulate it as I go on, I guess. Might be useful, thank you. So first of all, I just really want to thank you for your novel, and especially also for your essays, because they have I think how weird as it might sound, they have given me a lot of very useful words to talk about silence. Ik ga me as a psychologist and a family therapist, I work with refugee families and I study trauma communication, specifically in refugee families. And your work has just been a real inspiration in that aspect, and a real inspiration to my research as well. I use it a lot also, especially your essay, when talking to schools about language acquisition in refugee children. And my question relates to that. As I said, I will have to formulate it as I get along because it feels a bit messy in my head. Because I feel that your essay on the trauma of language acquisition and what you lose and the pain that is interwoven with leaving behind the language, it is super useful to create dialogue with schools as well, to help them understand how it's really hard for children to do what we in Belgium expect them to do, namely to come into a reception class and learn Dutch in a year, and then go on to regular education and just do it. And so it creates a lot of, it has been really helpful to create a lot of useful dialogue, and at the same time I always feel a bit conflicted as well by this time frame, because in the end these children will have to acquire Dutch. And however much respect that I would like schools to have for the pace in which they feel that's comfortable for them, it's always a bit of a tension as well. And that's why I think my question is, how do you look at that tension? Because at a certain point in time, you decided, I will learn Dutch, and I think it's comfortable to do that now, and you started writing your column as well, which is really, really nice to read. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on that tension in a timeline kind of way. I don't know if I make myself clear.
Clear enough, I think.
I think, yeah.
Thanks. Sulaiman.
Thank you so much, first of all. But I do think it really depends. You know, I think we don't often talk about the kind of nuances of a language. When, at what stage do you say this is good enough? What is good enough, you know? How many years do you need, for example, to speak a certain language, you know? Like, or what is good enough for you to say, okay, you know, I've learned enough now, and now I'm gonna go and do something else. So when I came to England, for example, I think I spoke like 2-3 English words, but now I write in English, you know. But when I decided to become a writer, I remember I've never studied grammar. So I was thinking at the time, for example, but I could speak to people, but you know. But then I was confronted that speaking to people, to your neighbors, at school, at work, is really different to actually sitting and trying to write in English. And then it was, oh shit, I need to learn it again. So, you know, I'm just trying to say that there will always be tension, you know. I think tension is necessary, you know. Even if you're born into a language, for example, if you decide you want to be kind of experimental with that language, then I think you have to unlearn and learn new things at the same time. So I think the tension is present, but I do think, for me, for example, in England, for example, if you come, like for example, for people like me who were not born in England, and you wanted to go to a university or higher education, then you know they take you aside and you have to do an English test. And that's what I did. And that's when I remember, like when I was before I went to university, I went to a college, for example, and then she said to me, once she knew my background, I could speak well, but once she knew my background, she said, oh, you know, we need you to do writing test. And then she said to me, are you a writer? That was like in 1994, you know. So there's that. I think by then I had already discovered a way with language to make it my own. And what I'm saying is, I don't think there's a formula that we can take and replicate. I think all of us, and that's what the point is, refugees are individuals, and each one of us, like Ubah, she came here and, not as a refugee, or I didn't come here as a refugee, so that's, and she learned French, and then now she decided, we're talking about it, not to continue French, right? She stopped a while along, so you don't go to college to study French anymore, right? You don't need it. Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think we can't hide from tension, but at the same time, we can't have a formula to talk about. I think each case is different, in my opinion, and I think I'm glad, like, for me, for example, it was different in the UK. I've went through different things. I did different, when you do engineering, your acquisition of language, the demand is quite different if you want to do literature, for example, because then a language is a weapon, the main weapon through which you have to kind of use to pass. So, so yeah, it's, I don't know if you want to add anything about the question about tension, and because you worked with young refugees, right, in Italy?
Yes, yeah. Yes, it was mainly about translation. We started working about, exactly, mainly about translation, because they were saying, for example, all these workshops started with them because they were saying that there were many words in Italian that they were not able to translate into Somali. So for me, I was there and I said, but there are also many words in Somali that you cannot translate into Italian. And so it was very empowering from them, and it was so beautiful because it was like, we were just talking and we started saying, what are the words that we could use, and we started trying to translate words in Italian and the opposite, and so stories, there was just this kind of tree of stories that was born from some words, and I think that translation is something very powerful that you can do. You can do many things with words, and because language is also an imagery. It's not only about words. It's also about how we say things, and what are the taboos as well. Because we are talking about silence, what we can say, what we cannot say. Is not all the time. It's not the same for all the languages, I think. So.
Which even holds within languages.
Yes.
Like the things we can easily say in Flanders would not be the same necessarily in Holland.
Yeah.
Last question. Ja?
Sorry for my English.
Nee, maar als u het liever in het Nederlands zegt, vertaal ik het even.
50 jaar geleden. When we can't say the things, we can ask to the children to create it with the universal language of art.
Can I turn that into a question?
Yeah.
Is visual art or music a more universal language than words and language are?
Well,
No, I don't think so. No, because I think that. No, because I think that. But she was not saying that.
No, I turned it into a question.
No, I
It was
think
a
that no,
suggestion.
because I think that the failure of literature is when it wants to explain something. It's not like that. Writers. We cannot judge. It's always because today, for example, they were asking me something about, and they said, in your novel it's good because you don't have goods, because it is about Italian colonialism, and so they were saying, Italians and Somali, there are both goods and bad on both sides, and they said, but I don't know. I said they are just human beings, and is not, writers shouldn't judge. It's just that you are trying to depict what a human being is. You are trying to do that, and so I think that poetry and you are not just the judging. The judgment is somewhere else, I think. Yeah. What do you say?
Well, I think like it's something I've been thinking a lot about literature, and for example about the language itself. And I think as a writer, for example, it goes, when you think about the language, it really goes back to how, or the kind of the skill set that you need to learn as a writer in order to become a writer, you know? And so, for example, and that's what I've been thinking a lot recently, and I wrote an essay called, for example, which I titled, How Do People Without Access to Books Become Writers, you know? Because the thing is, when I was an aspiring writer in the UK, I would go to events, and almost everywhere was like, if you ask an established writer and you say, oh, any advice? And then they would say to you, read, you know? Yeah. So I thought, like, years later, I come to Brussels and I have time to think about those things. And I started to think, actually, this is not right, you know? It's the most privileged thing you could do, because you totally are imagining that everyone else in this universe has access to books in the same way that you do, you know? And there are, for example, I found cinema first before books, and that's why every book I write is very cinematic. And there are even kids in the UK, for example, you know, from working background, poor families, or sometimes families who are not just interested in literature. They don't have the same access. Or like a single parent, for example, I think it's Stephen King, who said something like, frankly, if you don't read, you can't be a writer, full stop. And I thought, like, this is the most unnuanced, simple statement someone can make, you know? Because if it's single parents, you have, I don't know, 3 to 4 kids, you have no time to read, but you want to be a writer, so how do you become? And that's why I recommend to people with such background, actually, you know, you can read so many things. You can read a painting, you can sit on the street, because the street is a library and people have books. And that's why when people watch, I'm not just looking at their fashion, but also the expression, the face, the kind of, you know, all the kind of different aspects that humans' bodies carry, you know. And we have to become conscious and aware that reading isn't just reading books. We're sitting in a library, they're probably gonna kick me out now. but you know, and I shouldn't say all these things, but one writer, after I wrote this essay, wrote me and said, why are you writing these things? You know, we need to sell books. But I think we have to add kind of complexity to this idea of what we mean by reading.
The fact that people should buy books is something that we
come
back to.
Buy our books, please.
We're going to wrap up. Thank you very much, Sulaiman and Ubah, for this very nice conversation about your writing. Connecting to silence is my mother tongue, stilte is my moedertaal. And to wrap up the evening, Annelies Verbeke will read a part of the book in Dutch, so that you all get convinced that you want the book, and it's available right there.
Yes, it was a very nice talk. Sulaiman, I also liked what you said about what happens while writing, that you said that you make contact with a parallel universe. You know, I have tried to tell people that so many times, and then I get worried glances and lots of silence, and now you say exactly the same. Thank you. I am going to read a passage in Dutch that Sulaiman chose. It is quite in the beginning of the book. I think it's an excellent passage. to get this idea of transgression also. En zodra ik de poort naar mijn bioscoop opende, stapte de griffier naar binnen, een hele meute mensen achter hem aan. Een rij schokkende meisjes die brandhout droegen. Het hout kraakte op hun rug. Achter hen was een groepje oude mannen blijven staan met tulbanden om en gabbies om hun jasjes. Ze blokkeerden de ingang. Ze haalden herinneringen op aan Asmara. Sinds ik hier ben en elke keer als ik mijn ogen dicht doe, zei de oudste van hen, zie ik Mussolini in de grote straat die hij naar zichzelf had vernoemd. Ze hielden elkaars handen vast en liepen samen verder, gingen eendrachtig de herinneringen tegemoet. Buonasera, Jamal, ze groetten me vanaf de eerste rij. Er kwam een herderin binnen die de geitenhuid waarin ze tesmi maakte van melk nog aan het schudden was. De geur van boter vervloog toen er een sekswerker in de deuropening verscheen. Haar gezicht zat onder de zwarte komijnolie en was geparfumeerd met kaneel. Als marino-jongens liepen mijn erf op met truien om hun nek geknoopt, hun speelkaarten nog in de hand. De grappenmaker onder hen beelde met zijn handen een explosie uit, terwijl vrouwen met jerrycans vol rivierwater balancerend op hun hoofd door de poort liepen. De vrouwen lachten alleen maar, wiegden met hun heupen, hun handen in hun zij. Ze staakten hun geklets toen een vrouw van in de 80, wier dochter en kleindochter in de strijd voor onafhankelijkheid aan de frontlinie waren gedood, aankwam op een ezel. Het dier balkte terwijl de grootmoeder van zijn rug stapte. Ik stond op en gaf mijn zitplaats aan deze vrouw, die ooit leeuwinnen in haar baarmoeder had gedragen. Saba is vrij, zei ze, en ze kneep in mijn hand. Saba is vrij. Een vrouw is vrij voordat haar land bevrijd is. Ik kuste haar op haar voorhoofd. De rechter en de raadslieden waren er nog niet. Een vrouw beklaagde zich over het opmerkelijke gebruik elkaar voor het gerecht te dagen, alsof je met leven in het kamp nog niet genoeg werd gestraft. Maar de mensen waren al snel weer aan het lachen, nadat de kapper van het kamp mij vroeg of ik was ontmaagd door de onbesneden vrouw die bij het hulpcentrum werkte. Ik had haar geholpen met het vertalen van Engels naar Tigrinya en Arabisch. Ik wilde de ongetwijfeld lange discussie daarover de kop indrukken door te onthullen dat ik in feite ontmaagd was door een onbesneden man. Maar ik hield mijn mond. Ik glimlachte en bleef me verbergen achter mijn masker van schoon schijn. De nieuwsgierigheid werd alleen maar groter door mijn zwijgen. Ogen bleven proberen door mijn masker heen te kijken. Ik ging wat steviger staan om mijn mannelijkheid te benadrukken, vocht tegen de vrouwelijkheid die tot in mijn botten was doorgedrongen als mieren die gaten in de grond graven. Op de een of andere manier slaagde ik erin de onderdelen van mijn lijf bijeen te rapen en rechtop te staan als een palmboom. De rechter komt er zo aan, zei de griffier. Toen overhandigde een man, als om de tijd te doden tot het proces begon, mij en de zoon van onze Soefi-imam elk een zwaard. Tijd, zo luidt het gezegde, is als een zwaard. Ga er wijselijk mee om, of het is gedaan met je. De mysticus en ik werden verzocht een sprong te wagen die ons dichter bij het goddelijke, dichter bij bezieling zou brengen en dan te landen met zijn liefde op zak. De zoon van de imam en ik sprongen. We stegen tot hoog boven het erf, het kamp en zweefden richting de bessenrode hemel. Midden in de lucht kletterden onze zwaarden tegen elkaar aan en samen staken we ze in de monotone lucht tot ze bloedden. Het ging schemeren. Bloed vulde de bogen van de rieten daken. Mijn vriend en ik vielen lachend terug op de grond. We omhelsden elkaar, onze zwaarden achter de rug van de ander. Op deze afgelegen, verwaarloosde plek moet je vooral op je hoede zijn voor je vrienden, had Saba eens tegen me gezegd. Met haar woorden in gedachten drukte ik mijn handpalm hard tegen het schouderblad van mijn vriend, zoals hij ook bij mij deed. We markeerden onze aanwezigheid in elkaars geheugen en liepen lachend terug naar onze stoelen. Maar waar blijft de rechter, vroeg ik, in de hoop een eind te maken aan deze hele schertsvertoning. Het is niet dat ik mijn medevluchtelingen zat was, integendeel. Ik zou niet overdrijven als ik zei dat het hun medeleven en solidariteit was, waardoor ik de eerste weken en maanden in het kamp heb overleefd. Sommige families lieten me delen in de bedden en de schaarse kleren van hun kinderen, waardoor zowel ik als de kinderen 's nachts naakt sliepen terwijl onze kleding buiten hing te drogen. Onze ledematen met elkaar vervlochten, zweet bond ons samen als lijm. En een tijd lang, voordat ik mijn hut kon overnemen van een man die in de rivier was verdronken, sliep ik in verschillende hutten en deelde ik het hoofdkussen met een dichter, een verkrachter, een weduwe, een overspelige, een fantast en pathologische leugenaar, een imam, een homoseksueel, een priester, een heimelijke travestiet, een man die zijn zoon had mishandeld, een moeder die haar kinderen sloeg tot haar woede in hun huid was gegraveerd. En ik heb een periode bij een jonge weduwe geslapen die 's nachts op haar handen en knieën op de grond ging zitten om haar lichaam aan de geest van haar overleden man te geven, zodat ik naar bed ging met de geur van haar smachtende geslacht in mijn longen. De dromen van deze mensen, hun angsten en misdaden werden die van mij. Ik bracht mijn dagen door met de vraag of ik een dromer zou worden. Iemand die zich bewoog tussen verschillende landen en geliefden, of iemand die zijn slachtoffer in donkere steegjes zou achtervolgen, of een man van woorden. Of zou ik misschien wel door goddelijke interventie getransformeerd worden tot een vrouw als Saba, wier door maanlicht beschenen rondingen ik als die van mezelf had voorgesteld. Mijn adolescentie was gevuld met mogelijkheden om dit of dat te worden, en sterk beïnvloed door een ambitie die veranderde met elke nacht die ik in een andere hut doorbracht. Wanneer ik luisterde naar de harten van degene die het hoofd naast het mijne legde, terwijl hun adem zowel gruwelijk als sensuele en meelevende gedachten in mij aanwakkerde. Ik ben niets anders dan de som van de vele gedachten van die metgezellen. Want zonder dat ze het wisten, werd ik van alles. Een weergave van hun gulheid, een case study van hun nobele overtuigingen en een drager van hun ondraaglijkste geheimen. Tot